Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be doing a quick book review of Rage by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. That is a pen name of his. There's a whole lore behind it, but since I'm not super familiar with Stephen King, I'm not going to go into it and like all of his past on that. I was not initially going to do a book review on this because I did a long form discussion with Year of the Author and Laura. Why do you have to have the name that I have to imagine in my head every time I'm like Trinity? Trope Trinity Trilogy? I think that's it. On Year of the Author's channel, we did a long, 2-hour discussion of this book. So if you would like the deeper in thoughts about this, check that out. I'll link it in the description below. But I figured that I would add a little bit more, another book review. Another quick book review to the list of book reviews for this book, specifically because of the controversy around it and the fact that it was pulled, because I have some comments about it being pulled from publication by Stephen King himself and why that was the wrong move to make. So before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the links down in the description below, Lamoy and Fresh Meat feature. And number three, if you would like to check out some of my creative work, since I'm a writer, they are linked down in the link tree below, and I hope you'll check at least one of them out and not hate them. Okay, so what exactly is Rage? Rage is a psychological thriller novella about a kid named Charlie who one day he snaps. And after having been bringing a gun to school for a couple of months, he shoots another teacher in the head, and takes a classroom full of students hostage, basically. Now, all of the students get out alive, and the bigger thing about this is he slowly, over time, while he has these kids in hostage, is working through breaking the mentality of everybody around him. He wants to break in the adults around him, the authority figures around him very specifically, and he wants to break in these classmates that have always bullied and belittled him and didn't feel like he belonged with them, and get them to start acting out. And through the course of the couple of hours that they're in this room with Charlie gets them to express their backgrounds, gets them to touch on some of the more sketchy things in their backgrounds or the more transgressive things that any of them have been involved with, and slowly get them to embrace that transgression that has been a part of them or that darkness that is a part of them, until they all eventually turn on the one guy in the classroom who is not playing along with this game, and that's Ted. And in the end, there's a fade to black moment where all of the people gang up on him, and the book ends with Charlie releasing all of the kids after they've ganged up on Ted. All of them are unharmed, aside from the mental damage or psychological damage. And then Charlie goes head to head with the detective or the police officer that's outside that he's been communicating with. And as the detective comes in, Charlie pretends to reach for a gun and gets shot 3 times. Now, he doesn't die, but he gets incarcerated in a mental institute. And he seems to have lost it, not just for fear of himself, but for the fear of what he's done and seen other people do, and also some level of guilt, I would think. Again, I highly recommend, if you're really interested in deeper thoughts on this, to check out the discussion with Laura and Katie, because I go a lot further into this than I'm going to go into today. But in general, my thoughts with this book are the prose are very, very good. The character descriptions of this are very good. The character voice in this are incredible. I think this is a great character study for this type of person, and also to see how to make a supporting cast that works really well with the theme of the story that you're working with. This is also a great example of using small specific details in order to build a rich environment, rich memory, and to make things specific so a character feels real. If you watched my video a couple weeks ago about some of the fails in Amber Heard's storytelling when she was on trial, one of those things was vague details on important aspects and specific details on insignificant aspects. And this story is, I haven't read a ton of Stephen King because I'm not usually really a fan of him. But this story doesn't drag on. It gets right to the point, and the character information, the specific information, is very masterful. So I think this is actually a very good example of crisp, strong, specific writing for characters specifically. Now, people, I think, I don't know what the general idea or assumption is about this book when you hear that it is about a school shooter. It's not a mass shooting when you say school shooter. It's just a shooting that happens on campus, and Charlie only kills 2 teachers. And by only kills 2 teachers, I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I mean that he had a focused, intense sort of way. So in following Charlie's POV, you could tell that he's got issues with authority figures, because specifically he's got issues with his father. His father beat him, his father belittled him, abused him, demeaned him, and scared him when he was a kid. And it wasn't until he was like 14, 15, when he took the weapons back that his father was using against him. Specifically in the one memory that's mentioned in here, his father was beating him with a belt. He took the belt. His father picked up a rake from somewhere. He picked up a hatchet after beating his dad with the belt. His father, backed off and was like, let's get you taken care of. And during this memory, there's the line, maybe he had forgotten I wasn't 4 anymore, or 9 years old and cowering in a tent, having to take a whiz while he yucked it up with his friends. Maybe he had forgotten or never knew that little boys grow up remembering every blow and word of scorn, that they grow up and want to eat their fathers alive. And that shows the titles specifically. It's rage towards his father, and his father becomes, your relationship with your father becomes your relationship with pretty much every other authority figure in your life. I say this from experience. I'm sure nobody will be surprised that I don't have a great relationship with my father. Maybe that's a thing for another day if anybody is curious at all about that. But there was another line in this book, and there are so many good lines. Another line that specifically furthers that this is inspired by Charlie's father, and the treatment from Charlie's father was this line: when you're 5 and you hurt, you make a big noise unto the world. At 10, you whimper, but by the time you make 15, you begin to eat the poison apples that grow on your own inner tree of pain. It's the Western way of enlightenment. You begin to cram your fists into your mouth to stifle the screams. You bleed on the inside, but they had gone so far. And so this book it all starts with Charlie being called to the office because previously he had brought a wrench to school, and he went up to answer a question, and he was being belittled at the chalkboard or the marker board, whichever one it was, by the teacher because he couldn't do the answer. And so he grabbed the wrench out of his pocket and started smacking the board. And the teacher tried to take it from him, and Charlie kind of snapped and smashed the guy over the head with the wrench, which, as you might expect, left a lot of damage. So Charlie had issues before, and I think you can probably assume that even without this saying he was late constantly, or he had attitude problems, or he had gotten with some antisocial behaviors of other sorts, because it had already progressed to violence and just this momentary snap where it's bam and then an oh shit because he couldn't resist the impulse to violence, he probably had other outbursts of other sorts, not necessarily this sort of violence, but maybe snapping back with teachers, because even just through the intro of this book, you can see him getting snappy with the teachers, with the authority figures around him, because he has zero respect for any of them. He doesn't believe that they have the authority to tell him what to do, and he doesn't want to comply. He doesn't think he needs to comply, and he is instead in a battle for dominance, basically, with all of them, which you can see in the way that he has these exchanges, which many of the dialogue exchanges, the spoken exchanges between these characters, very good. I did write down Charlie getting sympathy from his classmates at page 81. The whole thing is about Charlie getting the sympathy and bringing people over to his side, and also control, the max of control. Ted is the main antagonist in this book because he stands out as the golden child, which means he's the ideal one to break compared to his other classmates. He's also got the same sort of foibles, like bad things in his background, his having to drop out of football so that he could take care of his alcoholic mother and his siblings whom his mother couldn't take care of because she was an alcoholic. So he's got the same terrible things in his background that Charlie is playing on the other classmates to get them to break. And he mentions specifically in the narration that Ted is unbroken. It's this idea of somebody being unbroken that comes up a number of times with Charlie and starts influencing and inspiring Charlie for what he wants to do, because Charlie feels broken. Charlie feels separated from the rest of the world, and these are his peers. So he's bringing them over to his side, and especially it's important to break the adults. So he does. He breaks the guidance counselor that he's supposed to have talked to. He tries to break the principal. He tries to break the detective/police officer, whichever role that man is. And every adult that he runs into and everybody in that class, he tries to break. He ultimately fails at breaking Ted psychologically in the same way he's broken his classmates. So then the book ends crescendoing with his classmates listening to him. So the book climaxes with Charlie telling his classmates, who have all been broken by him, to go after Ted and ultimately forcing Ted to become broken through physical means. Another line that I really liked in this book was, after a while, being somebody's responsibility makes them hate you, and I was scared that Joe might hate me someday. I didn't know all that then, not at 12, but I sensed some of it. So this heavily shows some of Charlie's POV. And one of the things to really know with Charlie is that he is not a reliable narrator. And it's kind of like when you're reading Bleed More, Body More, which I've written, and you're getting Joey's perspective, is you're not necessarily getting what the truth of the matter is or what is a rational experience. You're getting the experience of that character and what that character thinks about others, how that character relates to other people. And this is one of the reasons why I think that it is a disservice that this book was taken from publication and has been removed from circulation in general. I'm going to shift over to talk about that in just a second, but if you could find a copy of this book, I highly recommend reading it, especially if you want to write some transgressive style characters in a very honest way of examining them and not demonizing them, because I don't think that Charlie is a demonized character. I think he's a broken character, and he's the kind of person that we need to have more empathy for. Empathy does not mean condoning or approving of anybody's behavior, but I think this inability or this distancing yourself from people who are actually broken or actually hurting in a very, very extreme way is not helping anybody in the current climate to actually empathize with people. I think people are starting to de-empathize with people over the smallest things. So then when it comes to real brokenness, people don't have any sympathy for you. And it's so bizarre when we have a culture right now that is so forward in talking about mental illness and mental disturbances, that when somebody actually shows this level of disconnect, of maladjustment, of pain and hurt with their peers and with themselves and their background, that you actually get ostracized and belittled while people on television and on all the social medias are saying, look at the mental health care, look at the mental illnesses, and let's embrace and take care of people. It is where we're getting sent mixed messages where people are actually not being taken care of who do have mental illnesses, or people who do have mental illnesses get ostracized for it, while people who don't have mental illnesses or have minor/mild emotional disturbances mock those who are actually diagnosed. So there's so much to go on, and then that leads to further alienation and isolation for those like Charlie that are suffering. There's so much going on that I could go on for all of this. So I'm going to jump into the controversy side as to why this was removed, when it was removed, and my opinions on why that was a terrible choice. So in 1999, King said at a speech, "The Carnell incident was enough for me. I asked my publisher to take the damned thing out of print, and they concurred." That was during a keynote address at the VIMA annual meeting. I don't know what VIMA is, but it was at an annual thing. Stephen King advocated for removing this book from publication because it was associated with actual high school shooting incidents through the 1980s and the 1990s. In response, he also wrote a nonfiction essay about gun violence called Guns. So for me, this all looks like a very political move, specifically because Stephen King is also anti-gun, but it also Stephen King looks like a pansy. So he writes these horror books and he talks about being this horrible person or having all these terrible ideas and being this transgressive writer. But the thing that you write that is the most transgressive is a story that is actually empathetic to the plight of somebody in this really bad situation. Context: the Carneal incident was the Heath High School shooting in 1997, where 14-year-old Michael Carneal opened fire on a group of students, killing 3 and injuring 5. On December 1st, 1997, Michael Carneal wrapped a shotgun and a rifle in a blanket and took them to school, passing them off as an art project that he was working on. He was also carrying a loaded Rutger pistol in his backpack. Carneal rode the school bus with his sister and arrived at approximately 7:45 a.m. When he arrived, he inserted earplugs and took his pistol out of his bag. He fired 10 rounds in fast succession at a youth group of students. 3 girls later died, and 5 other students were wounded. Michael Carneal was a 14-year-old freshman at the time of the shooting. Carneal told reporters that he could not have given a single explanation for his crimes, and that contributing factors included a mistaken belief that his parents did not love him, taunting from his classmates, and false claims that he was gay. He also stated that he did not know who he was aiming at until he read the names in the paper. These are not uncommon things that maladjust somebody or socially distance somebody from their classmates and make frustration. Now, I'm not saying that he is justified in his actions, and that's never the case. When you empathize, you are never saying, I agree with this person by default. You are saying, I can understand how they logically made this decision from this understanding, what their logical conclusions were. It can still be wrong, but you can still understand the logic behind those reasons. And I think too many people are associating empathy, and I think too many people are associating empathy or understanding the reason behind somebody's actions with condoning it or supporting it or saying this is fine or saying this person should be allowed to just walk free again because you understand why they did what they did. And that's not true. You could say, I understand that you were angry. I can understand why you went this direction, but that is wrong. You're a danger to society, XYZ. Like, we could say the same thing with the Waukesha parade massacre, where we can look at why that person got in their car and ran over a bunch of people. We can see that they had a bunch of hatred in their heart and wanted to go after a bunch of people in the worst way, in the best way that they could. We can see what inspired that person, but that doesn't mean that we condone it. That doesn't mean that we agree with them or any of that, but we can see what inspired them, and it is important, it is imperative to know what elements contributed to the logical conclusion that created the disaster. So, thinking that your parents don't love you, or having parents that don't love you, or having parents that abuse you is not that uncommon. Taunting or bullying from classmates is not that uncommon. Having people make false claims about you is not that uncommon in high school. All of these things are so common, and they all affect in different mutations of the personality, in the development of social interactions, in the way that we have relationships with one another, that it is important to know how these things affect. So it's not, if we just imagine like 3 out of 5, I was going to say 60 out of 100, but if we just simplify that down, if we say 3 out of 5 students will experience these things, however, only 1 in 100,000 will turn into what Michael Carneal did or what Charlie Decker did, then we still need to minimize these actions that happen to these people, and maximize the observations of when somebody is suffering, so that we can help mitigate as much of this dysfunction as possible. Relationships with family and with those that you believe should love you, that you need to love you, are so important and cause such long-term damage in all relationships. And it is so ignored by the general of society. Like, one of the things I can't freaking believe is just how dismissive society is about divorce and how bad a divorce is on children. And I'm not saying there aren't reasons to divorce people, because there are very dangerous situations, but it's not ideal. And I'm talking about more the flippant disregard for children when it comes to divorce, not in abusive relationships. It's crazy to me, because we can watch again and again and again, and there are decades worth of research that's about what divorce does, what a parent abandoning a child does to their mentality, to their idea of self-worth, to their prospects for the future. And we can see how damaging it is, and it's still constantly done in a selfish manner. Parents. Also, the number of teachers that completely neglect their students. Like, I'm sure you get tired of hearing me talk about this, but Jeffrey Dahmer was openly drinking in class. How do you not have any of the teachers like address that and be like, there might be a problem here with him associating with his peers? Like, there's a lot of neglect that happens in the classroom. And if that neglect happens because there are not enough teachers, then it's time for teachers to start asking for smaller classes, demanding smaller classes, to pay more attention to the needs of each and every student, because something is not right. And gun control is not going to fix fathers and parents that don't love their children, or children that feel like their parents don't love them. That is such a deeper issue. So these are some additional thoughts from a different day than the original recording of the book review for Rage. And it's happened while sort of sitting and thinking and with current events and the commentary from the author, which is kind of surprising in contrast. So what's most disappointing is that the point of view of Stephen King has about guns is not only cowardly and self-serving, but it's also lazy. Too many times we see maladjustment of the individual. We tell society to change instead of changing the way that we contribute to the dysfunction that we see around us that we don't like. When someone like Charlie happens, people call for gun control instead of treating each other better, instead of telling fathers to stop abandoning or beating their children, instead of telling mothers to be nurturing and attentive to their children, and to stop being selfish when you have a family to take care of. Paris Bennett was not a school shooter, but he killed his little sister because his mother relapsed on drugs, and he was left feeling betrayed. He had no father, abandoned from birth. In the last week, I've been reading Alan Walker's book on pedophilia, with Alan trying to justify pedophilia and the destigmatization of pedophilia. Feel free to read the book and form your own opinions. I'd be glad to hear them. But as the individuals in this book are interviewed saying that they had situations as children that either made them feel stunted in development, this book then demands that society change to accept pedophilia instead of the pedophiles working to change themselves and heal from whatever maladjustment or dysfunction they've faced. The book doesn't even make the argument that it's not maladjustment. It specifically straight up says that it is that, but instead of working on yourself to try to deal with the difficulties or the lack of healthy development, it tells society to bend around to make the undeveloped people feel correct rather than trying to correct the undeveloped. The book argues that these are inborn from experiences, so they can't be changed. So society must help pedophiles by accepting what they want and imagine in their sexual fantasies. The book argues that they're not monsters because no one is born a monster. Society just has to accept that that's how they think. To say this is to say that every maladjusted individual is just born that way, and society should change for them, rather than holding people accountable for the way that they've contributed to the development of the individual, in addition to that individual having to take accountability for themselves and work against what is nature to them because of the dysfunction that is natural to them, instead of the dysfunction that is easier for them to embrace. In just about any situation, it's much easier to say that it's not me. It's easier to not claim responsibility for abandoning your children, for your mistreatment of your peers or your classmates or your coworkers. It's easier to be an asshole than to say, I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm sorry that I didn't care. I'm sorry that I didn't notice. I'm sorry that you never mattered. I'm sorry that I didn't want anything to do with you and I made you feel the way that you did to the point that you became this desperate. It's easier for the ego to tell society that it's the one with the problem and it needs to change than admit your own guilt by telling society to change, because of a personal dysfunction will fix nothing and does nothing but allow you to pretend that you've done nothing wrong, that you've done as much as you could to help, and it's everyone else's fault because they aren't as good as you, because they didn't help as much as you, because they don't care as much as you care. But you don't care enough to be involved in any sort of way. Everybody else needs to be involved. I'm continually surprised that Stephen King could write a book that fully shows he understands how destructive the father can be on his children when abandoned. He can acknowledge and show he understands just how powerful the father is as an influence on his children, but today he'll claim that it's not the father, it's society that has allowed it to happen by not restricting individuals enough. I don't know what happened, but either Stephen King is hiding his own guilty conscience of how he contributed to someone else's dysfunction and destruction, he's sold truth and compassion for fame, or he's completely lost his mind and his way. His striking down his own book looks more like he's hiding the truth he knows for political gain, because he can't write something like this and pretend that Charlie's behavior is something that politicians can fix with bans, when in reality it's clearly showing a broken family creates broken angry children, and broken angry children attack society. Broken families is not something that the government can fix, but power-hungry governments will use broken individuals to grab at more power. And power-hungry, money-hungry people will sell out as many people as they have to become kings of everyone else in the kingdom. It's actually sick to remove the responsibility of the father and hand it over to the government. You pretend that you care about the dead, but you don't. You didn't until they died. And then you find a scapegoat for how you've contributed to the hopelessness and meanness and evil. And you use the opportunity to push the same point of view while pretending that you care about anyone. But you won't get off your ass to change yourself, the way that you interact with others, and the way that you've contributed to the destruction of lives. Taking a book that shows compassion off the shelves, that shows a point of view that a lot of people don't understand, don't have the chance to understand, and will never go through, is not compassionate. It's you hiding what you know so that you can push what is politically powerful, what is politically monetizable, financially monetarily helpful for you. At the sacrifice of others and society. You're not helping people by taking this book off the shelf, and you're not helping people by calling for gun control. You're hiding the truth. You know you're hiding the truth, and you're hurting more families because you'd rather make everyone else change than reflect on yourself, change yourself, and be a good role model. So that's one of the most disappointing things in general about this book, and about Stephen King specifically, because Charlie shows that he understands, or at some point understood, where all this comes from. But instead of that, he drags it all out and says it's guns and the government that need to crack down in order to stop Charlie. That never would have helped, because Charlie didn't give a frick about authority figures. He would have gone underneath authority figures however he had to in order to accomplish his goal. And Stephen King at least knew this at one point. So I think that Stephen King was wrong in pulling this book, because this book does not glorify school shootings. It does not glorify what Charlie did, but it shows the darkness of somebody in that situation. And what it actually does, if you look at the book, is it is an attempt to create empathy and understanding for this character so that you can actually recognize it in real life, so that you can see the parallels, so that you can understand somebody that is getting to a dark situation. People having this book in their locker does not mean that they were inspired by it. And even if people are inspired by something, it doesn't mean that you have any culpability of it, because people use religious texts all the time to inspire themselves. People use freaking Taxi Driver inspired John Hinckley Jr. to go and try to kill Ronald Reagan. Like, you cannot control how people respond to what it is you're doing, and you cannot take credit for or responsibility for the actions other people do because you've created a work of art or a story that they bonded with. We need more transgressive things that are going to step on these lines and show people kind of darkness that doesn't have to be morally correct inside of storytelling. And we need fewer people that are reading into books or movies saying this has to be morally correct. The protagonists of the story have to be morally correct. You can only present these things that are morally correct. And if somebody acts out in a certain way, then we have to cancel that thing because you're not allowed to see that this exists. Stopping something from existing doesn't act like in media, does not actually stop it from being able to exist in person in real life. And people seem to think that controlling human behavior is that easy. And maybe you can control human behavior to some extent, but you're not going to end this sort of thing because you take this book out of circulation. In fact, obviously, since he took it out of circulation in 1999, clearly this stuff hasn't stopped happening. But you have stopped people from seeing this perspective. And that is the perspective of Charlie, the broken perspective, the perspective of allowing yourself to become so angry from your background, from not letting go, from not healing, that you seek destruction and you seek to encourage others to become destroyers just like you. So the cycle keeps on giving. Anyway, I'm ranting now, but that's how I feel about this. I obviously also write some somewhat transgressive fiction, what with my Jeffrey Dahmer book that I'm working on currently, and I have considered writing a couple other transgressive books in the future. We'll see how that turns out later. But let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below, since I'm kind of circling my thoughts at the moment. Looking forward to your comments on the subject, on the book itself, on the writing, any of the above, down in the comments below. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him. Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?